Have you ever wondered what real love looks like? The kind that doesn't care about your past, your wallet, or your scars? Because this isn't one of those sugar-coated fairy tales. No, this is messy. It's uncomfortable. It's a billionaire who was so tired of gold-digging lies that he disguised himself as a homeless man, just to see if someone could love him without a dime to his name. Sounds insane, right? But wait. It gets crazier. He never expected to fall head over heels for a young woman who carried her own bruised heart. A woman labeled and judged because she once had to sell her body to keep her grandparents alive. Her name was Suzy, and trust me, she's nothing like the cruel whispers said. Together, they faced every social judgment you can imagine. Rich versus poor, beggar versus billionaire, true love versus shallow interest. People laughed at him. They mocked her. But when life stripped them of all pretense, guess what was left standing? A bond so raw and honest, it would put any so-called perfect couple to shame. This is more than just a story about money, status, or lust. It's about choosing love when it's risky, or it's messy, when the entire world says you're making a mistake. Because sometimes it's in the dirtiest corners of life that you find the purest kind of grace. So stay right here. You're about to witness how a man who lost everything he thought mattered found something priceless in the most unexpected place, and how a woman the world discarded became the heartbeat of his entire universe. From the outside, John seemed to have it all. The sprawling estates, a line of luxury SUVs gleaming in his driveway, dinners that cost more than most people made in a month. But when the parties ended and the laughter faded, silence greeted him like an old, cold friend. You ever notice how hollow a mansion can feel when your heart's starving for something real? The echo of his footsteps through marble halls was a daily reminder that he was rich but profoundly alone. He lost everything that truly mattered long before he even knew how to cherish it. A reckless driver had stolen his parents when he was just 15, leaving him with more wealth than wisdom, and a lifetime of boardrooms instead of boyhood dreams. While other teens biked through parks or snuck kisses under bleachers, John was learning how to negotiate contracts that decided hundreds of jobs. A beggar might have had more freedom than he did. Women adored him, or so they claimed. They laughed too brightly at his jokes, clung to his arm like ivy, desperate for a sturdy wall. Each relationship followed the same cruel script. Whispered sweet nothings turned to questions about stocks, the size of his trust fund, how soon he'd buy them a new car. Kindness was traded for diamond bracelets. Love? That felt like an old fairy tale nobody believed in anymore. There was that one woman, Madison, who almost fooled him. She had eyes that sparkled with what he thought was sincerity. For a moment he let himself dream. Maybe she saw the man, not the money. But one night, after too much wine, she giggled and said, "You know, I'd never even look at a homeless guy. I need someone who can keep me in Prada." It hit him like a slap. His world tilted. Was he only ever going to be a walking ATM? He became obsessed with watching people from afar, wondering what pure affection looked like. At cafes, he'd notice young couples laughing over shared fries, a girl fixing her boyfriend's crooked tie. None of it had a price tag attached. Sometimes he envied beggars on the street. They wore their struggles openly. No pretense, no performance. Could kindness survive when there was nothing to gain? John's loneliness deepened into something darker. The newspapers called him a charming CEO, a visionary. Behind closed doors, he was just a man haunted by rejection that was never really spoken, just implied by hungry eyes and waiting hands. He'd replay conversations at night, searching for any hint of true love. It was always the same. They loved the billionaire, not the boy inside. You ever wonder what it's like to test the very foundation of who would stand by you if you lost everything? John did, every day. He imagined scenarios where he was broke, riding a rusty bike instead of a sleek black SUV. Would anyone even look his way? The thought tormented him, clawing at his chest when he tried to sleep. He tried pouring himself into philanthropy, thinking maybe if he gave enough, someone might see his heart instead of his wallet. But charity galas were just another hunting ground for social climbers. Even when he handed out million-dollar checks, people praised the money, not the man. Kindness wins, he whispered to himself, though it sounded hollow. Some nights he'd stand at the edge of his balcony, wind whipping his face, and think how tragic it was that a beggar might be richer in genuine connection than he ever was. Could he ever escape the weight of being John the billionaire and become just John? His soul was starving for true love, someone who would cherish him if he was stripped of every cent. Funny how desperation breeds reckless ideas. As John poured another glass of bourbon, staring at his reflection, a man with haunted eyes and more demons than dollars, a thought rooted itself so deeply it felt like destiny. What if he vanished into the world as a nobody? What if he dared to find out if love could bloom without gold watering his soil? Little did he know, the decision he was about to make would unravel everything. It started as a whisper in his mind, something so absurd it made him chuckle at first. But night after night, the idea returned, louder, more insistent, until he found himself sketching plans on napkins. What would it feel like to be just another face in the crowd, riding the subway, paying rent with wrinkled bills? Could he survive as a man stripped of privilege? Or better yet, discover someone who'd love him without all the excess? John liquidated a small trust, enough to live modestly for a few months. Then he called his security team, shocking them by announcing he needed complete anonymity. No drivers, no armored SUVs, no staff. If you try to follow me, I'll know, he warned. They stared back, confused and terrified to lose their cushy jobs. Who does that? A billionaire choosing to live like a beggar? He rented a shabby apartment on the edge of the city, walls thin as paper, neighbors who hardly made eye contact. The place smelled faintly of mildew and last month's regrets. A single creaky bed, a tiny fridge humming like it was complaining. But for the first time in years, he could breathe without expectations pressing on his chest. Buying clothes from thrift stores was humbling. He traded in tailored suits for faded jeans and flannel shirts with frayed elbows. His hands felt awkward slipping coins into bus fare machines instead of platinum cards. Funny, isn't it, how quickly life can shift from luxury to scraping change, from class to grass, when you decide it yourself. At first, he stumbled through the new routine, burned his breakfast, locked himself out, missed stops on the bus. Neighbors snickered behind half-open doors, whispering, "Clumsy new guy," unaware they were mocking a man worth more than their entire block combined. He caught himself laughing at their harmless judgments. Finally, the ridicule wasn't about his money. They thought he was just a regular nobody. John learned to walk slower, to notice cracked sidewalks, kids playing tag with bare feet, old ladies hauling groceries up broken steps. Small kindnesses appeared where he least expected. A shopkeeper offering an apple, a neighbor sharing an umbrella. No gold watches here, just everyday humanity. It was oddly intoxicating. Nights were the hardest. The bent springs squeaked with every sigh, and loneliness settled beside him like a ghost. He missed the smell of polished wood in his study, the view of city lights from 20 stories up. Yet deep down, he knew he'd traded that sterile comfort for a chance at something raw, unfiltered, maybe even true love. One evening, he watched a homeless man feeding scraps to stray dogs, smiling as they wagged their skinny tails. That tiny scene, a beggar who had lost everything, still finding joy in giving, struck him harder than any charity gala speech. Was kindness worth more when you had nothing left to offer? Everywhere he looked, life felt more honest. People didn't dress up their pain with designer coats. They argued in public, laughed too loudly, hugged too tightly. John found himself craving these messy, unscripted moments. Could this be the world where he'd finally discover someone who'd cherish him without suspecting a hidden fortune? Little did he realize, destiny was already maneuvering its quiet hands, weaving threads he couldn't yet see. A modest cafe on the corner would soon become the stage for the most unexpected meeting of his life, where a woman named Suzy would smile at him in a way no one ever had. But of course, he had no idea what waited just around that worn wooden door. Suzy was the kind of woman who could light up a dim room just by walking into it. Soft eyes, a smile that promised warmth. But if you looked closely, past the gentle curves and delicate laughter, there lived shadows under her skin, bruises the world couldn't see. Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, her shoulders would slump as if the universe rested squarely on her back. She had dreams once. College textbooks stacked by her bedside, pages dog-eared and highlighted in neon yellow. She pictured herself working at a small publishing house, maybe editing stories that would someday change lives. Funny how quickly ambition gets swallowed when sickness comes knocking. Her grandparents, the only family who never abandoned her, fell ill at the same time, medicine bills towering over every other priority. Desperation has a cruel way of making choices for you. It whispers, "What else can you do?" That's how Suzy found herself on the neon-lit streets, wrapped in dresses that made her feel naked long before they came off. She told herself it was temporary, just until the treatments were paid. Still, every time a man's hand slid against her waist, her soul flinched. Yet through all that, she carried a stubborn spark of faith. Late at night, after the last client left and she scrubbed makeup from tear-streaked cheeks, she'd kneel by her creaky bed and whisper to God, "Please let this pass. Please let me hold on until something better comes." Her whispered prayers floated up like fragile lanterns into a dark, uncaring sky. People loved to judge from a distance. They'd see her stepping from a stranger's car and mutter words like trashy or cheap, never stopping to wonder why a woman with eyes so soft had chosen this path. It was easier to assume she was greedy or reckless than to face the ugliness of a world where medical bills could ruin an entire generation. She wore kindness like a secret perfume. Once, she spent her last $20 buying groceries for a homeless man huddled outside her apartment. He blinked at her with tears brimming, whispering, "No one's ever done that for me." That tiny moment stuck with her more than any $100 tip she ever earned. It reminded her that kindness wins, even when you have nothing left to give. At times, she caught herself daydreaming of love stories. Someone who'd see past the label, who'd cherish her laughter, wipe away tears without expecting anything in return. Was that naive? Maybe. But late at night, when she traced the edges of old family photos, she still believed in true love. The kind that didn't ask for resumes or bank statements. Her grandparents never knew the real reason she could suddenly pay for so many treatments. Suzy masked her shame with stories of a second job at a diner. Seeing them smile, believing the world was still gentle, made every compromise worth it. "At least they can sleep peacefully," she'd whisper to herself, even as her own nights were haunted by unwelcome hands. Beneath all the scars lived a woman desperate to be loved, simply for being Suzy. Not for her body, her smile, or how easily she could play pretend, but for the softness of her heart, the jokes she told when nervous, the quiet dreams she tucked under her pillow. Somewhere out there, she hoped, was someone who would choose her, even if she had nothing to offer but love. She didn't know it yet, but the universe was already conspiring. A twist of fate was about to lead her into a shabby cafe on a rainy afternoon, the same cafe where a man named John sat nursing a cheap cup of coffee, hiding a life's worth of secrets. And there, with just one uncertain smile, everything would begin to change. It was one of those drizzly afternoons that made the city look washed out, as if the sky itself was too tired to hold back tears. John ducked into a small cafe on the corner, shaking raindrops from his shoulders. The bell over the door gave a weary jingle, announcing his arrival to no one in particular. He ordered a plain coffee, no cream, no sugar. A fitting choice for a man trying to taste life without its usual sweetness. Meanwhile, Suzy was already there, perched at a tiny table by the window. A paperback novel lay open in her lap, though her eyes weren't really reading. Instead, they drifted to the street, watching umbrellas collide and lovers hurry by, lost in worlds she longed to understand. Her hands absent-mindedly traced the rim of her mug, as if drawing invisible circles around her own loneliness. Their eyes met by accident. John, clutching his steaming cup, paused mid-sip. Suzy offered a small, tired smile, more out of habit than hope. But something in that fleeting expression tugged at him. Was it the way her shoulders slumped, the almost imperceptible sigh that deflated her chest? Whatever it was, it felt achingly familiar, like he was staring at a mirror reflecting hidden sorrow. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Around them, life buzzed. A cashier counting coins, a teenager tapping away on her phone, an elderly couple sharing a cinnamon bun. Ordinary scenes that made extraordinary pain feel almost out of place. Isn't it strange how you can sit in a room full of people, yet feel like the only two souls who truly see each other? John finally nodded, offering a gentle greeting. Suzy's return nod was hesitant, her fingers tightening around her mug. Their conversation started awkward, mere comments about the weather and the bitter coffee. But under the surface, something else stirred, a cautious curiosity, a fragile thread stretching across the table. As they spoke, John found himself laughing at her dry humor, surprised at how quickly the sound filled his chest. Suzy teased him lightly about his clumsy umbrella, and he noticed how her eyes sparkled just before her smile faded, as if joy was a luxury she couldn't afford for long. Have you ever witnessed someone trying so hard not to hope? Minutes stretched into an hour. They swapped tiny confessions. John admitted he was new to the neighborhood. Suzy claimed she worked odd jobs. Neither told the whole truth, of course. Some scars were too fresh, some secrets too tangled to lay bare over chipped ceramic cups. Still, there was an ease between them that startled them both. Suzy found herself laughing at stories of John accidentally burning toast, while he watched the way her hands danced when she spoke, graceful even when describing mundane frustrations. Small details that felt intimate, precious, like borrowed time they didn't yet know they were allowed to keep. When Suzy finally stood to leave, she hesitated. Her eyes lingered on John's face, a heartbeat too long. Her lips parted as if to say something important. Then she just offered that same small, sad smile and turned away. John sat frozen, staring at the door long after it closed behind her, haunted by the certainty that the universe had just dropped a fragile, glittering thread into his hands. He didn't chase after her, not yet, but as he sat there, tracing condensation rings on the table, a thought gnawed at him. What if this was the beginning of everything he'd been searching for? Neither of them realized yet that their meeting was no accident, that fate was already writing chapters neither dared to dream. The next few days were a dance of coincidences. John found reasons to pass by the cafe, telling himself he simply liked the aroma or the rickety chairs that forced strangers close together. In truth, he was hoping to see her again. Funny, isn't it, how we lie to ourselves so earnestly when our hearts are terrified of admitting need? Suzy, on the other hand, noticed her own patterns shifting. She started visiting the cafe more often, claiming she needed a quiet corner to read or jot down thoughts. But each time the bell jingled and John walked through the door, her pulse betrayed her, beating a little faster as if it recognized a promise her mind refused to voice. They began sharing tables, first out of convenience, then habit. Conversations deepened, moving from trivial banter to the quiet confessions people save for late nights or tear-streaked pillows. John spoke of losing his parents young, how it thrust him into a world of boardrooms and shallow handshakes before he even understood who he was. Suzy listened with a tenderness that nearly undid him. No one had ever cared for his story without calculating what it might be worth. Her soft nods and gentle questions wove a safety net beneath his aching memories. Isn't it remarkable how kindness can sometimes feel more valuable than gold? In return, she shared pieces of her own heartbreak, how her mother vanished one evening, leaving nothing but an empty closet and unpaid bills. How her grandparents took her in, frail, but determined to love her twice as hard to make up for a mother who never returned. John clenched his fists beneath the table, imagining a little girl waiting by the window for someone who would never come. Then came the hardest truths. Suzy admitted why she worked nights, how she became an escort not out of vanity but desperation. Her voice cracked under the weight of humiliation, and she stared at her trembling hands as if begging them to be braver. John's chest ached at the way she tried to shrink, as if making herself smaller could hide her shame. But instead of recoiling, he reached across the table, covering her hands with his own. "I don't see you that way," he whispered. And the way her eyes darted up, wide with surprise, carved the moment deep into his heart. You ever witness someone discovering they're worthy of softness for the first time? Together they unraveled more hidden wounds. Suzy confessed how men only wanted her body, never her laughter or dreams. John revealed how every woman he ever dated saw him as a wallet with legs. The tragedies differed in details, but the heartbreak was identical. Two souls who'd been mocked, measured, and left wanting by a world obsessed with status. Sometimes their stories spiraled into bitter laughter. Imagine, Suzy smirked once, a homeless man and an escort trying to outdo each other's tragedies. It was gallows humor, but it broke the heaviness long enough for them to breathe, to remember that pain shared can become lighter, almost bearable. They didn't know it yet, but each confession was a stitch, sewing two shattered hearts together. Somewhere between the shame and fragile jokes, a foundation was quietly being built, and as the days slipped by, it was only a matter of time before the cracks left by their pasts would allow something tender and unexpected to bloom. John and Suzy fell into a gentle rhythm, meeting at the cafe or wandering aimlessly down cracked sidewalks, sharing stories that felt too heavy for anyone else. There was no grand plan, no luxury dinners or glittering chandeliers, just two people with tired hearts learning to breathe in the same fragile space. Sometimes that's all it takes, isn't it? A safe place to let down your guard. They'd linger on park benches as the sun dipped behind rust-streaked buildings, laughing at pigeons fighting over crumbs. Once, John brought her a small paper bag of roasted peanuts. Suzy smiled so brightly you'd think he'd gifted her diamonds. That smile did more to heal him than any therapist or charity gala ever could. He learned the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her grandparents, how she used to dance barefoot in their tiny living room. She discovered he liked to sketch old buildings in a battered notebook, an odd little hobby that reminded him of moments he could control when everything else felt dictated by corporate boards. Have you ever felt your ribs expand just because someone finally saw you? There was a simplicity in their time together that bordered on sacred. They didn't need expensive wine or candlelit reservations. Instead, they shared greasy street food, wiping sauce from each other's chins, with giggles that melted away old humiliations. John often thought, is this what true wealth feels like? Not coins or stocks, but moments like this. One rainy afternoon, Suzy danced barefoot in the drizzle, arms spread wide, pulling John with her until he was soaked and laughing, water dripping off his nose. People hurried by, umbrellas clutched tight, shaking heads at the foolish pair. Let them judge. In that tiny slice of the world, judgment held no power. They talked about little dreams. Suzy confessed she still wanted to finish college one day, maybe write stories that mattered. John admitted he sometimes fantasized about living in a cottage far from the city noise, painting instead of negotiating million-dollar mergers. Their confessions felt like tiny rebellions against lives that had been anything but their own. Sometimes silence wrapped around them comfortably, like an old blanket. They'd sit side by side on splintered benches, hands tangled together, hearts speaking in quiet thuds. You ever watch two people say everything without uttering a word? That's what they did. Words were almost too clumsy for the sacred things growing between them. Small kindnesses piled up. Suzy often tucked napkins into John's pockets because he was forever spilling coffee. John started keeping mints for Suzy, remembering how she liked to chew them when nervous. These weren't grand gestures, no engagement rings or lavish surprises yet, but in their simplicity, they meant everything. Their bond formed not through wealth or lust, but through tiny, ordinary miracles, shared laughter over burnt toast, quiet tears that didn't scare the other away, inside jokes that made them feel like co-conspirators in a world that didn't understand. Somewhere along the line, the space between them ceased to exist, and yet, for all their honest moments, both still held on to slivers of fear. What would happen when the full truth spilled out? About his billions or her nights on neon streets. Neither was ready to shatter this fragile peace. But destiny has a way of forcing hidden things into the light, whether we're prepared or not. It was subtle at first, a gentle shifting of gravity. John found himself waking up with a quiet thrill, wondering if he'd bump into Suzy that day. Meanwhile, Suzy caught her reflection smiling for no reason, her cheeks flushed like a girl with a sweet secret. Isn't it funny how love tiptoes in, hardly making a sound, until suddenly you realize it's taken over everything? One evening they wandered through a tiny street fair, lights strung between lampposts like fallen stars. A guitarist played softly by a pretzel stand, and John pulled Suzy close, swaying awkwardly to the music. She laughed into his chest, her breath warm against his shirt, and he thought, I could stay right here forever, with nothing but this. For Suzy, it was terrifying and miraculous all at once. She'd built high walls around her heart, protecting it from men who only wanted what they could buy. But with John, there were no whispered prices, no stolen glances at her legs. Instead, he asked about her favorite books, her childhood memories, the silly things that made her giggle. He loved the unseen parts of her. One afternoon, as they sat sharing cheap fries on a stone curb, Suzy caught him watching her with an intensity that almost hurt. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she teased. John hesitated, then confessed, "Because you're the first person who's ever made me wish I was a poor man forever, just so I could be sure this is real." Her breath hitched, tears springing to her eyes before she could stop them. Their kisses were soft, hesitant at first, tasting like salt and surprise. Hands curled into hair, into jacket sleeves, as if terrified the other might vanish. Isn't that what love is? Two broken souls clinging tight, daring the world to tear them apart. Each touch was a silent vow. I see you, not your past, not your scars, you. John marveled at how easy it was to laugh with her, how the tightness in his chest, the old fear of being used, unraveled, thread by cautious thread. Suzy's eyes shone with wonder every time he revealed something tender. Like his drawings or the way he secretly loved baking bread. Tiny confessions built a fortress no amount of money could buy. Meanwhile, Suzy found herself daydreaming again, not of diamonds or mansions, but of small kitchens smelling of cinnamon, laughter echoing down narrow hallways. Maybe one day they'd adopt a stray dog together, paint mismatched walls, argue over silly things like who left the toothpaste cap off. Ordinary dreams that felt extraordinary because they were hers and his. Sometimes she still flinched, haunted by past hands that treated her like currency. But John would simply hold her tighter, whispering, "I've got you," until her breathing slowed. In those moments, Suzy began to believe in true love, the kind that didn't tally costs, didn't measure worth by bodies or bank accounts. Wordlessly, their hearts decided long before their mouths could admit it. This was no fleeting comfort. They were falling, hard, irrevocably. And while neither dared speak of forever just yet, the way they clung to each other said everything. Love had rooted itself in them, stubborn and bright, blooming exactly where the world least expected. But as beautifully as their days unfolded, the truth still crouched in the shadows, waiting. John's secrets, Suzy's shame, sooner or later, the light would find them both. And when it did, would this fragile, precious thing they'd built be strong enough to survive? John knew it couldn't last forever. Each tender moment with Suzy only tightened the knot in his chest, because every laugh, every whispered promise rested on a half-truth. At night, he lay awake, staring at cracked ceilings, wondering if love built on omission could survive once the whole truth came crashing in. You ever fear losing the very thing that saved you? He rehearsed countless ways to tell her. Imagine saying it over coffee, in the warm hush of their favorite park bench. even after a kiss so soft it felt like forgiveness. But each scenario unraveled under the same haunting question. Would she still love me if she knew I was a billionaire? That I let her believe I was just another man struggling to make rent? Meanwhile, Suzy basked in their new tenderness, her heart daring to trust that maybe destiny hadn't been so cruel after all. But there were small hints that troubled her. The way John sometimes paused before answering simple questions. How he never talked about bills or real struggles the way other men in their neighborhood did. One rainy afternoon, John couldn't bear it any longer. They sat together in the dim corner of a tiny diner, raindrops racing down foggy windows. His hands fidgeted with a napkin until it tore, betraying his nerves. Suzy tilted her head, concern darkening her eyes. "What is it? You're scaring me," she whispered. He took a breath that seemed to scrape his lungs raw. "Suzy, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you from the very start." Her shoulders stiffened, hands retreating into her lap as if bracing for impact. John forced himself to continue, voice cracking. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm not poor. I'm actually a billionaire. I chose this life to find someone who would love me without the money." Silence crashed over them, heavier than any storm. Suzy blinked, her face a war between betrayal and bewilderment. Then she let out a broken laugh, sharp and pained. "So what was I? Some twisted social experiment? A test to see if the trashy girl could fall for the prince?" Her words sliced deep, each syllable laced with years of humiliation resurfacing all at once. John's heart shattered at the tears brimming in her eyes. He reached for her hands, but she pulled back, pressing her palms to her temples, as if trying to steady a spinning world. "No, Suzy, it was never about testing you. It was about protecting myself. I've been used so many times by people who only wanted my wealth. You were the first person who ever made me wish I was truly broke." Her breaths came in shallow gasps. Memories of men who'd paid for her body, who'd lied and left, flooded her. Could she survive one more betrayal? Was John just another man dangling power over her, even if cloaked in tender words? Her vision blurred, the diner spinning, the scent of greasy fries suddenly nauseating. But then, something fragile broke through. The way John's voice trembled, how his hands shook on the table, the raw plea in his eyes. It didn't look like manipulation. It looked like a man terrified of losing the one piece of grace he'd ever found. Isn't it strange how sometimes pain recognizes honesty better than joy ever could? Still, neither of them knew if love could withstand a truth that heavy. As Suzy stood abruptly, chair legs scraping harshly against the floor, John felt the ground slip from under him. And while he watched her walk out into the rain without looking back, he couldn't help but wonder if karma had finally come to collect its due. Days slipped by in a blur after that stormy diner confession. John barely slept, haunted by the echo of Suzy's retreating footsteps. He wandered the small apartment, hands trailing over cheap countertops that suddenly felt like prison bars. You ever hold your breath so long, waiting for a phone call or knock, that your chest aches? That was his every minute. Meanwhile, Suzy spent hours curled on her grandparents' worn couch, their gentle voices in the next room grounding her like lullabies from a safer time. She replayed John's words over and over. Was he truly different, or just another man with power dangling promises she couldn't trust? Her heart was torn between years of scars and the fragile bloom of hope he'd awakened. Finally, unable to bear the torment, she called him. Her voice cracked so badly on the line that John nearly dropped his phone. They agreed to meet in the small park where laughter once drowned out heavier truths. As she approached, her silhouette framed by drooping willows, John's entire body trembled. What do you say to the one person you can't afford to lose? They sat on the damp bench, space yawning awkwardly between them. For a long while, neither spoke. Suzy twisted her hands, eyes trained on her scuffed shoes. John cleared his throat, words tangling until finally spilling out in a hoarse whisper. "I never meant to deceive you, Suzy. I just I didn't know how to find someone who would love me for me. She nodded slowly, tears pooling. And I didn't know how to believe someone could love me for me. Not what I did to survive, not my body, not my shame. Her voice was so soft, so broken, that it shattered something inside him. Isn't it cruel how life molds two people perfectly for each other, only after wounding them beyond recognition? John reached out, hesitant, then took her trembling hands. I don't care about your past. I only care about the woman who buys groceries for strangers, who laughs with her whole face, who dances barefoot in the rain. His thumb brushed away a tear. Your kindness, your faith, they're worth more to me than every dollar in my bank. Suzy let out a ragged breath that sounded almost like a sob. Slowly, she met his gaze, searching for any flicker of pity or superiority, the look she'd grown used to from men. But all she found was raw, terrified love. And in that fragile mirror, she saw her own worth reflected back, untainted by shame or judgment. Their conversation meandered through old wounds, awkward laughter breaking the tension. They confessed dreams too small to ever voice before. She wanted a cozy kitchen where they could bake bread together. He wanted lazy Sundays reading novels on the porch. Simple things that felt like forbidden luxuries to two people accustomed to transactions, not tenderness. By the time dusk painted the park in bruised purples, they were leaning against each other, hands intertwined, hearts thudding out tentative promises. They hadn't solved everything. Scars don't vanish in a single afternoon. But there, in the hush of falling leaves, they chose to try. And sometimes, isn't choice the most sacred kind of love? Still, as they stood to leave, an unspoken truth hovered. Love would demand more of them yet. They would have to face families, curious eyes, perhaps even tabloids if John's world intruded again. But for now, they walked home together under one small umbrella. And that fragile, trembling togetherness was more than enough. John didn't return to his penthouse right away. Instead, he stayed in that humble apartment, learning to love squeaky floors and neighbors who argued over whose turn it was to take out the trash. He and Suzy spent evenings cooking cheap pasta, dancing in the narrow kitchen, burning garlic bread because they were too busy laughing. Funny how luxury can be so overrated when your heart finally feels at home. They made weekly trips to visit Suzy's grandparents, whose fragile smiles deepened into true joy seeing her glow again. John would fix wobbly chair legs, help with old tax papers, even plant a tiny flower box under the kitchen window. Each act was a silent promise. I'm here, not because I have to be, but because this is where I want to be. Suzy often caught herself watching John when he wasn't looking. The billionaire turned handyman, sleeves rolled up, hair tousled, offering shy grins every time she teased him about his crooked hammering. He looked so free, so blissfully human. Could love really be this simple? Two people choosing each other over and over, no matter what their pasts screamed. They made plans under whispery blankets at night. Maybe she'd go back to college part-time. Maybe he'd invest quietly in local businesses that actually made life better, not just richer. Dreams were scribbled on napkins, tucked into drawers, waiting like tiny seeds for spring. Have you ever felt hope bloom so fiercely it nearly scares you? Their relationship wasn't without shadows. Sometimes, Suzy would flinch awake from nightmares of hands that didn't belong to John. Sometimes, John would grow quiet, haunted by boardroom sharks and socialites who'd mocked him for seeking love in the wrong places. But every fear was met with patient hands, whispered prayers, slow kisses that said, I'm not going anywhere. John finally introduced her, the real her, to his closest confidants. There were skeptical looks at first, raised brows, whispered judgments about rich versus poor and her past as an escort. But then they saw how his entire face changed when she entered a room, how Suzy's laughter seemed to stitch pieces of him back together. And slowly, the world's cruel opinions began to matter less. They spent weekends exploring flea markets, collecting odd little trinkets, a chipped vase here, an old clock there. Things no one else valued, yet together they turned their tiny apartment into a sanctuary. Isn't it poetic how two people once treated like disposable things found magic in items everyone else overlooked? One morning, over burnt pancakes and mismatched mugs, John pulled out a simple velvet box. No grand spectacle, no photographers, just shaky hands and eyes wet with devotion. Suzy, will you keep building this messy, beautiful life with me? Will you marry me, not the billionaire, but the fool who fell headfirst for your stubborn grace? Tears streaked her cheeks as she laughed, nodding so fiercely he worried she'd hurt her neck. The ring was modest by his standards. No $5 million diamond, just a delicate band that sparkled because of what it meant, not how much it cost. In that moment, it felt like all the universe's conspiracies had finally aligned. And while there would still be challenges ahead, whispers, old scars, fears that sometimes roared louder than reason, they faced them hand in hand. Because love isn't about spotless histories or fairy tale endings. It's about choosing each other, day after trembling day, building a future on cracked foundations that somehow hold the strongest. But of course, that's a story still unfolding. Isn't it strange how sometimes the ugliest parts of life lead us straight into the arms of something breathtakingly beautiful? John and Suzy were both scarred by worlds that judged them by wealth, by bodies, by shame. Yet somehow, those same scars became the seams that stitched their hearts together. Think about it. Would you have had the courage to love someone if you knew the world would mock you for it? Would you trust love enough to risk your reputation, your comfort, even your own fragile pride? Because that's what they did. And in the end, it wasn't the billions or the dark past that defined them. It was how fiercely they chose each other, day after trembling day. Maybe you're carrying your own scars right now. Wounds from judgmental stares, heartbreaks that still ache when the nights get too quiet. Or maybe, just maybe, you've been waiting for a sign that love like this still exists. If so, let this story be that gentle whisper telling you it's out there. It's messy, it's imperfect, but it's real. So tell me, what would you have done in their place? Would you forgive a hidden fortune? Could you look past someone's painful history and still choose them over and over? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd truly love to hear your heart on this. And hey, if stories like this move you, if you crave tales that mix pain and hope, laughter and tears, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notifications. We've got so many more stories that just might leave your soul a little softer and a little braver.